How about that?
All right.
Okay, there are lots of different types of editing services that are out there. These are the main four. There's developmental editing, where the editor works with the author on editing the story, getting that right. There's an editorial assessment, which doesn't involve as much hands-on editing by the editor, but it provides the author with a lot of feedback as well. Then we get into copy editing and line editing, which are the services most people think about when it comes to editing, where the editor is in there line by line and word by word. And then there's proofing, which helps get the project ready for publication. Now, some of these are all services that authors either need to hire someone to do or to do themselves. So you don't have to work with a professional for any of these. But if you do, these services come in at different times in your project. The developmental edit is good when your story's not done and you just need help with someone to sort of fix it, whereas proofing is done right before publication. The copy editing's in the middle. Other types of services that editors provide, or at least that I provide, are formatting the books, which is taking that proofed copy and readying it for publication. Submission packages, if you are trying to land an agent through traditional publishing, editors like myself can work with you on those submission packages to present your project as well and fully as possible for the agent. If you're indie publishing, an editor can work with you on the sales copy. That could involve any presence of your book on the web, on your website, or on the physical book itself, like on the back cover. Editors can also be a critique partner or an accountability partner. And I usually have one or two ongoing clients where I work in an accountability or critique partner service. And that I like to do that, to work with authors one-on-one and just help them continue on their journey. Okay, so for a developmental editing, this is the story editing. This is usually done for, we'll use the example for fiction authors. Once you've done that first draft and then maybe gone through a few passes, your story is pretty complete from A to Z, but you're going to feel like maybe it needs work. The work that the editor can help you with to improve the story includes these areas: making sure there's enough tension, that things are happening and that your readers want to keep turning pages. Character arcs, looking at your main characters and your secondary characters to ensure that those characters show some sort of growth, that they're not really static in the story. Looking at structure, which is how your chapters and scenes and arcs all kind of hold together, how the book is put together. I'll show you a couple different classic novel structures as we get into that slide, but structure's a really important one as well. This idea of plot versus story. So for you, I know what Lael is writing, but for Charlene and Mike, are you fiction or nonfiction?
I'm fiction.
You're fiction.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for Charlene and for Mark, because Mark writes a lot of fiction as well, there's this idea of plot versus story. And this is something that as an editor, I have to look at for all works, from short stories up to novels. The idea of plot versus story is there's plot, which is the external things that happen in your story, so sort of relaying all those events. And then there's this idea of story, which is how those events affect your main or your POV characters, how those characters change. So plot is usually like the external things that happen in your story or in your manuscript, and story are the internal things that happen to your character. And it's this delicate balance that we try and look at. So for example, if you're writing a thriller, your thriller is probably going to have more scenes of plot, things that are happening, than internal story, that you still need to have those in there. So what I do is I look at the book and how far along I am in the book and what's happened so far, and then figure out, if there's enough stuff enough things happening for it to be a plot-driven novel, and also if there's enough happening to your main character so that your character has his or her own story as well. I also look at, this is a term called scene versus sequel, where we look at, maybe there's a chapter where something happens, there's an action scene, and then there's what's called the sequel, which is the repercussions of that action scene. So we try and look at and try and balance that out at the chapter level and also, throughout the whole book. I also try and look at how your book will fit into your specific genre. So again, like an action adventure, a thriller, a mystery, or a sci-fi versus a more literary work. If it's a mystery, for example, we want to make sure that there is a mystery, that there is something to solve, and that the main character has to struggle through whatever barriers to solve the mystery. That's what your genre expectations are, because that's what your readers are going to expect. A developmental edit is the longest and most expensive edit and the most hands-on by the editor. So when I'm doing a developmental edit, I'm reading for content, but I'm also stopping hundreds and hundreds of times within the book to make changes directly in the manuscript, either to delete scenes, to note where scenes may be added, to give some of those example scenes, like here's how I would rewrite this, or here's how I would add to it, to move things around and make a lot of notes and suggestions to the author. A developmental edit is, again, best when you've done that draft and you feel pretty confident that the story is holding together, but for some reason it just needs work. Maybe you've run it through some beta readers who are like, oh, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I'm not sure why. I hear that a lot. And, working with an outside person can help you answer those questions about why it's not working. This is also where I will look overall at length. Some books come in too short. Most often, books come in too long. So we look for ways to really kind of overall tighten and make that story more impactful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
quick question. So,
Sure.
I'm pretty new to novel writing, but I produce films. So from my point of view, when we do script writing, we have like the rough pass, and then we have the scene by scene breakdown, which is probably what this is then, right? You take each scene and then you look at it and go, okay, this is affecting our main character this way. It's affecting the Annie character. Like you say, is this beneficial to the film? Like, is it worth even keeping this in? Like,
Sure.
So do you do that with your novels as well? Like, is that what this would be?
Yeah, it's not an exact match to what you're talking about, but it's pretty similar. When you, for your example, when we're looking at the scene level, what we want to do is keep scenes in that either drive the plot or drive the story. So drive the action or drive the growth of the character, and take out the scenes that don't do either. And that happens a lot, especially with newer authors. They'll think of a lot of scenes that they want to have in and put them in the book, and then maybe figure out if they work or they don't work. And then you give it to someone who's not as emotionally connected to the work, and that person is like, this scene doesn't work. Cut it. Get rid of it.
Yeah, because that's been my issue. Because before giving somebody my book to start editing, I didn't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on the first edit. You know what I mean? And it was an enormous book. So I sat down and I went through every scene and said, is this important? Should I just axe it and figure out a way to, and my book went from 120K down to, 75, and it feels a better read to me.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
I don't know if I'm doing even the right things.
Well, you headed in the right direction word count wise. What genre are you writing in?
So it's a thriller. So
yeah, okay. Yeah. Thrillers should be tight. And 120, that's not too ginormous. So, I actually just had a client who I was working with developmentally. His book was edging really close to 300,000 words, which is way too much.
I have one of those as well.
Yeah, don't we all? So there we made, I was like, look, like you're trying to get traditionally published. Even in science fiction, you're going to be scared away agents. They don't want to look at huge books from debut authors. It's more a sign that the author is afraid to cut stuff. So we made a plan for, all right, let's split this into 2 books, or let's split this into 3 books. But yeah, that's how it works developmentally. So yes, I'll talk about prices at the end. I'm not shy about talking about pricing. Tens of thousands would be a lot of money for this. Like that's overcharged. But there is a cheaper way to get that feedback. And it happens to be on the next slide.
I wanted to ask a question about
Sure.
genre. When you're deciding if you're going to take a book or not, are there particular genres that you don't want to touch or that you don't want to go with?
Well, personally for me, yes. And you'll find this there are editors, it kind of depends on the project. So if I were looking at a project that was straight proofing, so the client was like, look, story's done. It's been edited either professionally or I'll get Lael back in here. It's been edited and they're just looking for proofing. I don't care what the genre is. I don't care if it's fiction or nonfiction because I can make sure it's ready for publication. If I'm looking at developmental editing, I have a preference as far as genre stuff goes. So, Lael, I'm just going to mute you if that's okay. I'm getting a little background noise. Is that all right?
Sure.
As far as genres for developmental, I like action, adventure, thriller, mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, romance. I tend developmentally to stay away from more traditional literary, like hard literary works. I don't love reading it anymore. I like genre fiction more. I've done, and mostly adult fiction, but I've also done down to middle grade. So middle grade and YA, young adult as well.
When I doing a story now, when I'm starting a book, I think about the tropes of the genre I'm in. Like you probably know, my first couple of books, I didn't really follow tropes for the genre I was trying to write in.
Sure.
And I think as I go along, so I guess my question is, do you have like maybe a list of particular things that you would look to see and that were in a particular book that says it's like a horror novel?
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, we'll take horror as an example. So there's like real straight hard horror. Think like, some Stephen King, some Dean Koontz, like those sort of things, Joe Hill. But I also have I have an ongoing client where I've worked on a couple of her books, and her horror is very subtle and very light, like really well written. It almost has a literary flair to it. But stepping back, if you're presenting this, especially as an indie author, if you're presenting something in a specific genre, there are going to be genre expectations. So horror, it falls into this branch of speculative fiction with fantasy and sci-fi. It's stuff that, as a rule, isn't present in our current world. Either it's future-based or it's alternate history or it's supernatural or whatever. So there's going to be some basic expectations as far as genre readers go. Like folks who love horror, they're not going to embrace a book that they think is horror if it's strictly like a chase to capture a serial killer. Because that is done now. You know what I mean? Like there might be some horror elements in there, but they're going to be looking for, if this is branded horror, like, is there a supernatural element? Is there an otherworldly element, etc.? Whereas that same book presented as a thriller probably wouldn't need any changes and the readers would embrace it. There's not really a good list. But when I'm looking at projects, and if someone presents it as, for example, science fiction, then, all right, then it either has to be sort of future-based, alternate history-based, otherworldly. It needs to have some speculative elements in there. Or in that case, then I'll talk to the author and I'll say, like, is this genre really what you want to be in? And stepping back for that, so many books, especially from indie authors, are cross-genre. I run into that a lot. I've written a lot of that stuff where it's like, well, this is a sci-fi mystery, LGBTQ, and I'm like, okay, well, that's 3 different genres. Let's make sure you're hitting in all of those areas.
Right. Okay.
Oh yeah, so the less expensive way for the Charlene et al. Is you can get what's called an editorial assessment. This gives you the same sort of feedback that a developmental edit would be, but what it involves is the editor reading through everything, taking a load of notes, giving you a report back, but not actually doing the work inside the Word document. I'm trying to do more of these because I don't like charging clients a lot of money for things that they don't need. And a lot of times, if clients are seeking a developmental edit, when I speak to them, it feels like what they're really looking for is feedback. Like if they were in a critique group, only critiquing the whole book at the same time. That's what an editorial assessment does. So you get like a lot of the same feedback at like a third of the cost. Or half, I guess. But it works really well for authors who know that the onus for doing the revision is more on them than on the editor. And I'll still work hand in hand with them to see how this stuff fits. But that's a good way to do it. For example, for you, Charlene, if you're ever looking for something like that, look for an editor who might be able to give you an editorial assessment with a thorough report. Is a cheaper way to go. And you'll oftentimes get what you need if you don't mind doing some of the revision yourself. So now the story is done. Then you might want to work with an outside partner on your copy and line. And this is usually what people think about when they think about working with an editor. Spelling, grammar, punctuation, POV choice and consistency. So this is for fiction for the most part. And this is, when I look at POV choice, it can get a little developmental in that I will look to see like what POV choice the author has chosen to do. Are they writing this in first person or are they writing this in third person? If they're writing it in first person, that's all through just the eyes of that one main character or other characters. Third person is referring to the character. So, Mark said, Mark thought, etc. But also making sure that POV choice is consistent, that we don't change that point of view within the chapter, that the reader knows when they hear someone thinking in the book that they know who it is and why that person is doing that. I look a lot at how we write down character thoughts. Do we have to say that she thought, she felt, she saw, or can we get a little bit closer? How we present those thoughts to the readers. As I'm going through word by word and line by line, I'm also looking at tone. I'm looking at how those chapters begin and end. Do they end at the right place? Do they begin at the right place? Oftentimes, chapters go on for a little too long, so I'll sometimes cut and try and make it a little more appealing to change the page. I look at chapter length, any sort of fact checking along the way, and that can get down to, how to spell proper names, or is the name of this hotel correct? Or, did this thing happen on a certain date? Anytime I come across a fact that I'm not 100% sure that I know the answer to, I keep a browser window open when I'm editing and I jump out to any reference site and just check all that stuff. And I also look a lot at tightening as well. Depending on how the manuscript has been put together, I can do proofing at the same time I'm doing copy line. If it feels like the story's in pretty good shape and that there aren't a ton of revisions for the author to take care of later, I'll often try and take on proofing at the same time as the copy line if I know I'm going to be the last person to look at it. I'll talk about proofing in a sec. Does that make sense around the copy and line?
Yeah, and then this is when I would give you like something, because I always keep a secondary document, which is like the family tree for everybody and how their relationships are with everyone and locations and that kind of stuff. Yep, that's good. When you have a big cast of characters, it's important that your editor knows all these people and how they fit in, especially if it's not going to be apparent in the book. I like to get that secondary information, but I like it to just come through in the manuscript. But I know that there are books with a big cast of characters. So yeah, that stuff is helpful. Well, it's a mafia family, so there's a lot of people coming.
There's people in and out all the time, right? And a very defined family tree, because that's your power structure.
This just seems like so much to be doing. Do you find yourself going through the manuscript more than once?
That's a good question. For copy and line, I try not to. I make a lot of notes and I make a lot of highlights, but some of that stuff is to myself. So that second pass is more resolving stuff. Like I'll make a lot of notes and highlights at the beginning because I'm not familiar with what's happening. So I'll ask myself questions in comments, and then when I get to the end, I go back and see if I can answer all those questions myself. Because I like to try and do it in one pass. I don't want to, tie things up for the author if I can. I don't need to go through it 3 or 4 times. But it's a weird way to read, because you're reading, but I'm reading so I remember what happens. But I'm also, sometimes I don't really care what happens. I just care if the words are correct. It's this weird little dance. And then at the end of the day, you're just exhausted because it's like you were actively reading all day. So for proofing, it involves a lot of the same stuff as copy line, but it's that final check where I know that I don't necessarily have to do a lot of fact checking. Like you'll see a lot of the same stuff is here, but this is where I get into making sure that all the quotation marks are lined up, making sure that all the spacing is lined up, flagging anything that the author has that might be some in their head. These might be like text conversations or found documents or, any of that stuff, like that I've formatted all that stuff correctly and isolated it so that whoever is getting the manuscript next can be assured, like, these are the things that the character texted. These are the ways that, this is the letter that was being read to the grandchildren, that everything is sort of buttoned up and tightened up. And so that they can hand it off to whoever's formatting it and know that everything's pretty accurate. 100% would be great, but there's always things that slip through every filter. But if I can combine copy, line editing with proofing, that just helps the author out. And usually, for me, if someone hires me just to do copy editing, I'm kind of proofing it as well. Like Mark knows, like the first thing I do when I open a document is I kind of scan through it. I'm like, how are they using M dashes? How are they using spaces? How are they using tab stops? And just try and make sure that that stuff is all consistent. Because we want the documents to be clean and not messy or any of that stuff.
I would think it would be tough to separate the two, and just do copy.
Yeah,
it's kind of natural to, here's a spelling mistake. What do you do? Ignore it,
Yeah, I can't. So, and I try and catch all that stuff in both. But I did want to separate it here because a lot of times you may be working with an editor who's worked developmentally or copy, and then you just need someone to do one final check. If they're doing that one final check after it's been edited, they're going to be looking at a lot of this stuff. If it's the same person, they're going to be doing it at the same time, hopefully. So then there's formatting. And there's a lot of ways to do this. If you are looking to get your book traditionally published and land a literary agent, this is not something you have to do or hire an editor to do. This is something the publishing house will do because it is their product. Your product, but their product. If you are an indie author and you want to self-publish and do this yourself, then you've got to think about how to format it. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's free software to do it. There's a bunch of different software packages that do it. I use a program called Vellum for the most part to do the formatting, and I'll show you that in a second. But formatting involves taking your manuscript and turning it into a product. So it's figuring out how you want to present this physical product. Is it going to be an ebook? Is it going to be printed? Is it going to be both? How do you want it to be bound? How big do you want it? That's the trim side. What sort of look do you want to give it? Do you want it to be more modern, more throwback or retro? How do you want, you don't have to worry as much about font for things like ebooks because the ebook reader or device puts in its own fonts, but for print, you want to think about that a little bit. And then also, this is where we talk about what goes in front or in back of your novel. So if Charlene's working on her novel and she has it's exactly 90,000 words and it's great and it's totally buttoned down, But what comes before or after that in the book? Where do you put your dedication, your acknowledgement, your about the author? What do you have on your copyright page? How are your tables of content laid out? That sort of thing. And occasionally I'll work with the author or directly with the cover designer to make sure that everything's accurate. Usually for your cover designer, they need to know within 2 pages how many pieces of paper are going to make up your printed book. So if I'm doing the formatting, then I'm the one who's in control of the look and feel of that book and how many pages there are. So I need to make sure that the cover designer knows that, along with the trim size. This is what vellum looks like. Well, your book was done in vellum. This is what I had been looking at when I had been working with your thing and some of the mutual client that Mark and I have had. So just as a little example over here, like it's set up into 3 columns. There's the stuff that's in the book. Then the middle is the editing part. This is where I am doing my work. And then on the right-hand side, I get sort of this live preview of what the book looks like. I just wanted to show you vellum because you may have, if you're ever researched doing your own formatting, this is what it looks like. It's a Mac-only program. It's like $200. It's good. There's other good formatting packages that are out there as well. But this is whatever you end up using, or if you do it yourself through the Amazon site or the Kindle site or whatever, it's the same sort of process. There's the pieces of your book. There's what you change to make the piece of your book correct. And then there's what it's going to look like on the right-hand side. So however they do it. All formatting software.
May I say something, by the way? May I just interject something?
Of course.
I don't know why anybody would use vellum when they know, if you're available, because you did such a beautiful job on my book.
Oh, thanks, Laurel. Well, for authors who, if you're only going to do like 1 book or 2 books, it's probably not worth it for you to buy vellum yourself because there's a little bit of a learning curve. There's time. But for self-published indie authors, I use them interchangeably. A lot of indie authors who write a lot, they'll buy vellum because they're producing their work. They're not only writing the product, they're producing the final product as well. I know of folks who have bought it and learned it themselves, but it can be a lot of time and it's a decent amount of money. But yeah, however you want to format it, there's ways to go about doing it. But this is what that stage looks like.
If you don't have a Mac, if you're on a PC, I've been using Dave Chesson's Atticus, and it's similar to this.
Yep.
It works pretty well.
Yep. I have Atticus and I've learned Atticus and I stayed up to date with it. I haven't come across anything yet that I need it to do that vellum can't, but I will. I love vellum, but there's some stuff it can't do that maybe Atticus can do better. I don't know. But as far as my process goes, this is the one I turn to first. But again, there's a lot of different packages that are out there. Okay, so submission packages. If you are looking to traditionally, make sure I'm good for time. If you are looking to traditionally publish your book, editors like myself can work with you to help you try and get that process down. Either try and land a literary agent, working on your query letter, your synopsis, query letter mostly for fiction, synopsis for both, book proposals for nonfiction clients. Editors can work with you on things like, coming up with decent comp titles, which are books that you can tell the agent. Readers who like Stephen King and Dean Koontz, like those would be easy ones, but it's the more niche books where you're like, I need to find like 3 or 4 authors that are like mine or 3 or 4 books. And that can be hard. Editors read a lot, like we tend to geek out and not only read a lot of books, but read books about books and read what's been published or whatever. So we can help you with that stuff as well. And oftentimes I'll work with authors on their sample pages. So like if they're trying to land a literary agent and the literary agent is like, all right, so I want a query letter and a synopsis and 10 pages, then you can work with your editor to make sure that, the query letter is good, the synopsis is good, and that the 10 pages are like the right 10 pages to send and that they're formatted correctly. If you're going to email them or submit it via a form or whatever, anything we can do to help you try and land a literary agent. Can also work with you on things like your sales copy, your Amazon sales copy, which can be the same as your back cover copy, anything that's about your book, how to take that same information and what would it look like on your website, or your social media. And we can help you with editorial reviews as well. Those are the reviews that you on Amazon, you have control over. You get to type those in yourself. Oftentimes for books that I work on, I'm more than willing to give the author an editorial review and help them make that Amazon sales page as compelling as possible. So then there's also these partnership things. I'll work with clients on accountability, check in with them once a week to make sure that they're writing, not, this is something they want me to do. Doesn't bother me if they don't write, but if they want a partnership where they want someone to help them check in and make sure that they're getting their butt in the seat and writing, I can do that.
It always helps to have someone keeping tabs on you.
There you go. Well, folks like, my friend Mark is a very fast writer. I am not a fast writer when I'm working on my own stuff, but I do actually have 2 accountability partners as far as work things go. Can work with authors on sort of an ongoing critique. And I've done a couple of these where I'll have clients get in touch with me every month or so and just say, here are the chapters I've written. What do you think? And so we sort of pretend like they're in a critique group. I run a couple critique groups anyway, but these are more one-on-one things. Can help authors with this idea of, should I traditionally publish? Should I publish it myself? Should I kind of hybrid publish? What's my publication strategy? How do I get my stuff in the world? And, help them with their writing journey, their author career. How do I set up my books in a series? Do these books logically fit together? It's a lot of fun. So overall, when you work with an editor, they have to be kind of geeky as far as words go, because they're dealing with your words. The things when I work every day on client projects, I try and make sure I'm being consistent, that I have a methodical process, that I'm not just making it up and changing my process all the time, that it's getting to know my authors. I have digital notebooks for every client, and I write down, our interactions, but also notes about their writing, things that I know I need to look at. So if I'm lucky enough to work with them again, I know their prose, I know how they write, and, where they need more propping up than in other areas. And this idea of objectivity and subjectivity, editors it's not like we're like word spell check where you just say, fix everything, make it all the same. Like especially for fiction, there's a lot of subjectivity that comes into it. So I'm going to show you something here. If I can I'm going to move my screen out of the way and you can do the same with yours. So I'm going to show you clips of 2 books. These are screenshots that I took from my Kindle. That's why they look sort of graphical. So these are both going to be fiction books. This first one, it's from a book called What Can't Be Seen by Brianna Labuskis. I love this book. In this little section, here are the things that I like to look at. There's this main character, Gretchen. The story is told, it's written in third person, but we only get to hear Gretchen's thoughts, which is great. I'm impressed about how the author used white space. This short section, that's 8 paragraphs. Like does not have long paragraphs. This is what you want in this sort of thriller / mystery. You want things to move right along and not have big bulky paragraphs. She only has 1 dialogue tag. It's this one here. It says, I have a stalker, it seems, Gretchen said, for the most part. Well, there's also Shaughnessy Grouse back. But you can see when we know who's talking, she doesn't feel like she needs to say he said, she said a lot. It's, up here, he glared, clearly knowing he was being played. And then in quotations, what? It came out of demand rather than a question. She doesn't need to say what he said or what he asked because it's very clear. It's really good, tight writing. And so that's the sort of thing I look at if it feels like the author could benefit from that, is stripping away some of those tags. We have little character movements, like down here. We have eyes narrowed, Shaughnessy shifted back. And in those 5 words, that's a very economical way of letting us know what this character is doing and how they're feeling. And again, she didn't feel the need to say that he said something because it's clear that he did. So she's keeping her prose really lean. This author likes to not use pronouns, but likes to use the proper names a lot, which is I don't love it, but it works for her. But up here, you can see there's Gretchen, he, Gretchen, Shaughnessy, Gretchen, Shaughnessy, Shaughnessy. So she uses the last names of the characters, except for Gretchen, who's the POV character. That's when she goes to first name. So these are the things that I look at when I'm editing something, is to try and see like where the author's prose feels like it's humming along, and trying to make sure that the rest of it does the same thing. So if I was editing this work, this writing feels really natural. I would try and make sure that she doesn't all of a sudden lapse into a lot of he said, she said, because it's different than this prose. Does that make sense? Just sort of looking at that consistency. This is from a book called Don't Look Twice by Andrew Gross. This book's a little older. Brianna Labuskis's book just came out a couple weeks ago. Andrew Gross, I've read a lot of Andrew Gross. This book was from, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, whatever. Same sort of thing, 6 paragraphs, a lot of white space. He's keeping the tension high. This is a really action-y scene. So when you're looking at how to make sure that our character movements, especially movements between two characters, feel really fluid, he's not a bad author to look at, because there's a fight here. There's a punch and a lunge, pulling down, grabbing, shaking his head, raise back to punch him one more time. Andrew Gross did a really good job. Like it can be hard to write action scenes when characters, especially fight scenes, but he does a pretty good job of it. They're in one room, it's just 2 characters, so it sort of works. One of the things that bugs me about Andrew Gross, and this isn't like, it's not right or wrong, it's just the way that I edit and read stuff, it's something that kind of pops out at me now, is between 2 characters, he has the characters say the other character's name a lot in conversation, more than I am comfortable with. Normally in conversation, like if Lael and I are talking, I don't need to say, how are you doing, Lael? And she's like, I'm doing fine, Dave. And then I say, that's great, Lael. Let me ask you a question, Lael. There's just 2 of you talking. Like, you don't need to say each other's names a lot. Andrew Gross does this a lot. Your life is bleeping done, Warren. Ty, please. And then in the same paragraph, I know who you're pushing up against, Ty. Like, whenever he does this, it like says the other character's name twice in the same paragraph. I'm like, ugh, I would not have left that in there. It just feels off to me. But Andrew Gross is a very well-selling author, so I would just step aside. He also loves his italics, or his editor loves the italics. It's the rare page on the Kindle that doesn't have at least one italicized line. And I'm like, sometimes it feels like it's too many. But these are the things I look for when I'm going through a client's manuscript. If they want to italicize the thoughts, that's totally fine, but be consistent about it. Like, there's a movement, it seems like agents have been saying over the last year or two, in third person or close or in first person POV, they don't want a lot of these lines to be italicized, especially in first person. If it's a book where it's just like and then I'm thinking something, you don't really need to have that in italics, because there's only one POV character. Like, we know that it's a thought, but it's just trying to find that balance to make sure the prose reads correctly. So it's just funny. Sometimes you can really improve a paragraph or a scene by adding or deleting italics, or adding or dropping a pronoun or a proper name. And it's all you need. And it just feels a lot better. And it's a really simple change. So that's something that these are the things I just want to point out that we editors think about when we're editing. And also reading, because now I can't read anything without thinking like an editor. Like, reading's just ruined for me. Editors will price stuff by a lot of different ways. It could just be by the project. It could be by the hour. Like, I have a pretty good understanding of how many pages or words or things that I can get through in a certain hour with a certain type of prose. So you may see things priced by project hour, by word count, or page count. Sites like Readsy, where I get a lot of my work, they give us recommended prices per word that we should quote for different projects. So when you work with editors, if you're trying to find somebody, ask them how they price stuff, because it can be done a couple different ways. Usually what I do is I look at a sample and really get an idea of, okay, it's this type of edit. It's this, like, here's the shape it's in. And then I price it out a couple different ways. I'm like, how would I price this by the word for this type of project? How long do I think it would take me to get through? I come up with the prices, and usually I just try and quote whatever the cheapest one is. But sometimes the prose is really difficult, and I know it's going to take me a lot more time, and I have to upcharge for that, like if it's really messy. So, but oftentimes you can, if you find the right editor, they'll bundle stuff. Like if I'm doing line editing for somebody and I'm proofing it, and they want the book to be formatted, a lot of times I won't even charge for the formatting, because if I've done my job and I'm formatted in something like Vellum, it should take me less than an hour to properly format that book, because I've tried to set myself up to format the book correctly, if that makes sense. So you can often, if you find the right person, bundling can save you a lot of money. Just like all the commercials on TV about cell phones and all that. Bundling. I'm going to put a PDF of this in the chat so you can download it, and you'll have my contact information if you have any questions or anything that I've written here. And then, all right, so I'm going to figure out how to dump that in there. Mark, do you have any questions, or do either of you have any questions that you want to talk about?
I just kind of, I guess, some personal questions. How did you get started in all this?
That is a great question. The different jobs that I've held career-wise over the years always came back to writing. I was doing technical editing. I was in corporate marketing. I was an instructional designer. I was a technical trainer. And it always came back down to written communication and information dissemination. I was a journalism major in college. And so years ago, I started to pick up freelance newspaper gigs. I was a stay-at-home dad for the most part, so my time was minimal for years as far as being able to work. But as I slowly got back into it, it was a lot of newspaper writing and editing. Then I joined the board of a local nonprofit writing center here in Massachusetts, where I got to work with authors directly. So then it was just over time, I took a lot of courses, and then I figured out, is this something I could actually make money at and be a valued partner? So you just try. Don't charge people money till you think you can do a good job, and then charge people fairly and try and be a good partner. It's, I'm grateful for every client, and I'm grateful that when I wake up each day and I know that I get to work with words. Can't beat that. Get to work with books. And then at the end, as I said to Mark, and I think probably to Lael, I buy every time there's a physical book, I buy the physical book, and I have a bookcase that's just for client books or books where my stuff has been in or I've happened to touch. And that's my motivation. Get to look at books and help people get their books into the world. No better job than that, at least from my point of view.
Well, you do a great job of that. Thank you so much for all your help and support, both of you, Mark and Dave.
Yeah,
my book is in existence thanks to you. Now I just need to learn how to promote it.
Promotion for indie authors, as we know, is the toughest thing. It can be harder sometimes than writing the book. But yeah, I'm grateful. I want to see these books into the world. It's gratifying because I know, being an author, what it means and how scary it can be to trust somebody, because I use editors, to trust somebody with your creative baby. Working with an outside editor should always feel they're part of your family if it's done correctly. I'm sure you could just use them as a gig, but you should always have a comfort level, and because you're trusting someone with your words, and that's a big deal. Yeah.
Great. Charlene, do you have any questions? Okay.
No questions from Charlene.
On the go.
What's that?
I got most of mine answered on the go.
Oh, you did? Really? Well, that's rare. Usually I'm just babbling on. Everyone's like, yeah, did you cover this? Did you cover that? If you have questions, Charlene, Mark and Lael will both know I am very not salesy. I don't really do a good job of selling myself. I am 100% not being salesy here. But you should just feel free to ask me any questions about the editing process at any time. just if you, because now you have another name. I am not a used car salesman. Just, ask questions at any time. Because I know how scary it can be. You're faced with, oftentimes clients will be like, I don't even know what it's like. Like, I don't even know what I'm paying for it. Everyone just says I should get an editor or whatever. And I'm like, ugh, just let's not make this scary. This should be fun. It should be fun to get your words into the world. And it shouldn't cost you $1 trillion.
I can attest to the fact that it is fun to work with you, Dave.
Well, it's got to be fun. It's anytime you can collaborate to try and push your work into the world, there's no better feeling than that,
Right.
Especially for, a lot of my clients are folks who they can't not write. Like, they just have to write, but they know they need somebody to help them get their stuff into the world. No better job.
Yeah, I write every single day, and
so you can't not write, Charlene, right?
No, if I miss a day, it's like I haven't gone to the gym. Like I'm antsy. Like, I have 22 books written, and none of them out in the world. So
oh boy, okay. Well,
my friend she signed me up for the Women in Publishing Summit, and she's like, go meet people and figure out how to publish your books, because you've got all these books and you're constantly writing. And even then I was learning how to market, and they were like, oh, write yourself a little novella, like a magnet. And that added 2 more books to my list, because I couldn't stop at 25,000 words. They ended up being 75,000, and I can write that in like 4 days. Like,
that's
crazy.
You've got more than 20 books, you don't need to just write a special novella. Just use like the first of a series, or to take one of your books. Mark Dawson, who's hugely successful, actually, I think he has 2 or 3 books that he offers for free as his reader magnet. So you don't necessarily have to have like the short story or just a novella.
But you'll just have to figure out, how to get. That's a lot of work, Charlene, that you have out there. So with your thing, it's going to be like, do you need an editor? And if so, but then you also don't want to be like, all right, so I need to pay 20 times $2,000 to get this stuff out there. Like, it's a lot of work. Talk to me or talk to somebody sometime about, this is what I have. Like, now we got to figure out which book should be first, or, is this a series, or how do we get this stuff out into the world, and what sort of shape are all these in? That's a lot of work. It's a lot of books.
All of them are written, and I've done a full edit on all of them, at least one full edit. So I feel kind of confident giving them to somebody to read. It's not like their first pass or anything.
Sure.
But I've got 2 genres that I write in, so thriller and then supernatural. So I've come up with my pen name because my personal name's used on movies. I've produced 18 movies.
Okay, sure.
I can't use Charlene Kelly on anything.
Sure. Well,
I'm just dealing with all that madness right now of creating a pen name, making that in existence, and websites and social media and that kind of stuff right now.
Yeah, you'll need to get it ready, but also you'll need to have the maybe for you, pick a book that might be one of your favorites, or the one that you think is close to ready, and then work with an editor on, get an assessment, and just one of the things I talked about, and just say is this ready? Would this be something that would be ready for market? And if not, what do I need to do to bring it up? And how does it fit in with the rest of the genre? And, and just go from there. But, for a lot of folks, it's producing the content is the hard part. For you, it's going to be more like, what do you do with it all? Often ideally it's work that can just be pushed back to the author, and they don't need anybody after that. But usually they do.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. And if you want a copy of this recording, you can write to me at mjalbertbooks.com. I put it there in the chat. Wish you both all the best.
Yeah.
Dave,
thank you so much. Give Dave a try. You'll love it. You'll love it.
Yeah, I don't hear that very often. So thank you, Lara.
Thank you.
Well, I try and be a good,
Mark.
love getting this stuff out there, as does Mark. So be
All right,
well.
guys.
Good luck with everything, Lael, and good luck with all your a million books showing.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.